My boyfriend, whom I loved deeply, me inside my older sister. I was the one who made her popular online, but when her friends turned on her, my parents took her side and yelled at me. Growing up, I always looked up to my older sister, Sarah. She was everything I wanted to be: confident, beautiful, and so effortlessly charismatic. I remember being just 5 years old, watching her in front of the bathroom mirror as she applied lipstick with this almost magical grace. Every movement seemed intentional and elegant. Sarah was the girl who got straight A's, had a huge circle of friends, and seemed to just glow. Even as adults, it was hard not to feel a little overshadowed by her. But I loved her deeply and trusted her with everything. So, when I discovered the truth, it shattered me. My boyfriend Mike and I had been together for almost 3 years. We'd met back in college and hit it off right away. Our connection felt natural, and before long, we were sharing a cozy little apartment downtown. It wasn't fancy, but it was ours, and for the first time, I felt genuinely happy, or so I thought. Mike had this way of making people feel seen. He was always attentive, always checking in, doing little things to show he cared. With him, I never felt the need to worry or doubt. I trusted him completely. Then, a few months ago, things began to shift. Mike started acting distant. I figured it was stress from work. He'd been working later than usual and would come home exhausted, barely in the mood to talk. I didn't want to push him or seem insecure, so I let it slide, but I couldn't shake this nagging feeling that something wasn't right. I just couldn't put my finger on what it was. Last week, it all unraveled. It started with a simple text message. Mike had left his phone on the kitchen counter while he ran out to the store, and a notification popped up. Normally, I'd never think about looking at his phone. We weren't the type of couple that checked each other's devices. But this time, something compelled me to look. Maybe it was instinct, maybe dumb luck, but I picked up his phone. The preview message read, "Can't wait to see you again tonight." I felt my heart drop, my breath caught in my throat, and my stomach twisted into knots. Who was he planning to see tonight? And why were there heart emojis? With my hands shaking, I unlocked his phone. He'd shared the passcode with me ages ago, so it wasn't difficult. I opened the messaging app and started scrolling up through the conversation. What I found made my blood run cold. The messages were from Sarah, my sister, the one person I thought I could trust more than anyone else in the world. The messages between them were sickening. They were flirty, playful, and painfully intimate, lines and phrases I couldn't unsee, words that would haunt me forever. They'd been meeting up for months, sneaking around right under my nose. There were pictures, too. Nothing explicit, but enough to make the truth sickeningly clear. One shot showed Mike with his arm wrapped around Sarah, both of them grinning like they didn't have a care in the world. It was dated just 2 weeks ago, a night he'd told me he was working late. I dropped the phone like it was on fire. My hands shook uncontrollably. Tears threatened, but I was too shocked, too furious to cry. My mind spun 1,000 miles an hour. How could she do this? How could he? Every memory I had of them, every time we'd all laughed together, was now drenched in betrayal. I wanted to scream but felt paralyzed, unable to even find my voice. When Mike finally came home, I was still on the couch, phone in hand, staring blankly at the wall. I didn't have a plan for how to confront him, no words ready, but as soon as he stepped through the door, I knew I couldn't keep it in. My entire body trembled with rage as I stood up. "I know," I said, my voice barely more than a whisper but sharp enough to cut through the silence. "I know about you and Sarah." Mike froze, his face draining of color. For a moment, he didn't say a word, the guilt scrawled across his face as clearly as if he'd confessed himself. After a tense silence, he finally stammered, "I can explain." "Explain?" I snapped, my voice rising. "Explain how you've been sleeping with my sister behind my back." "How long, Mike? How long has this been going on?" He looked around the room, his eyes darting like he was searching for an escape route. But there was no escape from this. Finally, he muttered, "It's not what you think. Not what I think." I threw his phone at him, hitting him square in the chest. "I saw everything, Mike. I saw the messages, the pictures. Don't you dare try to lie to me now." For a moment, he was silent, then he dropped his head into his hands, mumbling, "It just happened. I didn't mean for it to." "You didn't mean for it to?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. How could you do this to me, to us? He just stood there, looking utterly defeated, like a deer in headlights, as the weight of what he'd done finally settled on him. The two people I trusted most in the world had shattered that trust, and the betrayal was overwhelming. I couldn't breathe in that apartment another second. Without another word, I grabbed my keys and stormed out. I drove for hours, aimless, until finally, the tears came, pouring out like they'd been waiting to fall since the moment I'd read that first, devastating message. The grief hit in waves, heavy and uncontrollable, like I was drowning in my own mind. Questions surged, one after another. Why Sarah? Why now? Had this been going on longer than I realized? And the worst of all, was there something wrong with me? Was I not enough? Every thought felt sharper, each one more painful than the last. I ended up at a friend's place, someone who wasn't close to either Mike or Sarah, someone I knew I could trust to let me crash there without asking too many questions. But sleep wouldn't come. I lay awake the entire night, replaying the events, questioning everything, wondering how I'd missed the signs. The next morning, I knew I couldn't avoid it any longer. I had to confront Sarah. As much as I dreaded it, I needed answers. I drove to our parents' house, where Sarah was still living, and rang the doorbell. She opened the door with that usual confident smile, but when she saw the look on my face, her expression shifted. "What's wrong?" she asked, putting on this fake look of concern. "You know exactly what's wrong," I whispered, my voice barely steady. "I know about you and Mike." For a moment, Sarah looked genuinely caught off guard. But then, her face turned cold. "So, you found out?" "Yeah, I found out," I said, feeling the anger bubbling up again. "How could you do this to me, Sarah? How could you betray me like this, with my boyfriend of all people? What kind of person does that to their own sister?" She crossed her arms and shrugged, her face blank. "Look, I'm sorry, okay? It just happened. We didn't plan it. It wasn't supposed to turn out like this." "Sorry," I scoffed, unable to believe what I was hearing. "You've been sneaking around with Mike behind my back for months, lying to me, and all you have to say is sorry?" She just shrugged again, like this was some minor issue. "What do you want me to say? We're both adults, and things got complicated." "Complicated?" I repeated, stunned. She was talking about it like it was a minor inconvenience, not the heart-shattering betrayal it felt like. I stared at her in disbelief. "I trusted you, Sarah. I looked up to you more than anyone else. And you destroyed that trust." She actually rolled her eyes, like I was the one being unreasonable. "Look, I get that you're upset, but you'll have to move on. It's not the end of the world." "Move on?" I could barely keep my voice steady as the anger rose. "You've ruined my relationship, destroyed everything I thought I knew about you, and you expect me to just move on?" She didn't respond, didn't even try to defend herself. She just stood there, staring at me with this look of annoyance, like she couldn't be bothered to deal with my emotions. And that's when it hit me. Sarah didn't care. She didn't care about how deeply she'd hurt me or about the devastation she'd caused. She was only thinking about herself. Without another word, I turned and walked away. I knew in that moment that this was a wound she'd never understand or try to heal, and there was nothing left to say. After confronting Sarah, I'd left feeling hollow, more alone than ever. I thought that maybe facing her would help me find some closure, some way to start healing. But it wasn't that simple. Mike and I hadn't officially broken up yet, and I was torn. There was this awful part of me that still loved him, or maybe it was just that I couldn't believe the man I'd spent 3 years with was capable of such a terrible betrayal. Either way, I knew I couldn't move on until I'd seen him one last time. Maybe I wanted an apology that actually felt real, or maybe I just wanted to scream at him until I had nothing left. A few days after my talk with Sarah, I decided to go to Mike's apartment while he was supposed to be at work. I figured I could gather some of my things in peace and maybe start piecing myself back together without him around. But as soon as I pulled up, I noticed something was wrong. His car was parked outside, and the lights were on. My heart started pounding. He wasn't supposed to be home. I hesitated, standing at the door, wondering if I should just turn back. But my curiosity won out. I still had a key, so I unlocked the door and slipped inside as quietly as I could. The second I stepped in, I heard voices. Their voices. My chest tightened, and a sick feeling twisted in my stomach. I moved toward the living room, barely breathing, each step feeling like it took a year. As I rounded the corner, I saw them, Mike and Sarah, locked in a kiss, right in the middle of the living room, like they didn't have a care in the world. Like I didn't exist. For a moment, I felt like I was watching from outside my own body. There they were, my older sister, the person I had looked up to for my whole life, and the man I thought I'd spend forever with, wrapped up in each other like this was perfectly normal. I stood frozen, unable to move or breathe. Knowing they'd been sneaking around was one thing, but seeing it with my own eyes, it was a punch straight to the gut. After what felt like an eternity, I finally found my voice. "What the hell is this?" They sprang apart, looking like kids caught by their parents. Mike's face turned ghostly pale, and Sarah just stood there, wide-eyed, her hand still resting on his chest. Neither of them said a word. They didn't have to. The scene spoke for itself. "How could you?" I shouted, my voice cracking as tears welled up. "I trusted both of you. What the hell is wrong with you?" Mike opened his mouth, but I couldn't bear to hear anything he had to say. The rage in me boiled over, the betrayal cutting deeper than I could have ever imagined. My mind was a storm of pain and fury, and all I wanted was to get out of there, to escape the twisted nightmare my life had become. My mind was racing, swinging between the urge to scream, cry, or tear the whole place apart. But I didn't do any of those things. I just stood there, frozen, staring at them both, waiting for some explanation, even though I knew none would make this right. "It's not what it looks like," Mike stammered, taking a cautious step toward me. "Not what it looks like." I laughed bitterly. "I literally just caught you kissing my sister in our apartment, Mike. How could it be anything else?" Sarah finally spoke up, her voice small and pretending innocence. "It just happened, okay? We didn't plan this." "Stop saying that," I snapped, glaring at her. "You've been saying that since I first confronted you, and it doesn't explain anything. How long has this been going on, Sarah? How many times have you snuck around with my boyfriend behind my back?" She just looked down at the floor, silent, like a kid caught doing something she knew was wrong. Mike reached out, as if to touch my hand, but I yanked it away before he could get close. The nerve of him, thinking he could somehow make this better with a gentle touch. "Don't," I warned him, my voice trembling with barely contained fury. "Don't you dare." I turned back to Sarah, who still hadn't moved an inch. "You're my sister," I said, my voice cracking. "How could you do this to me? I loved you, looked up to you my whole life. And this is how you repay me." The silence that followed was unbearable. Neither of them said a word. I couldn't stand another second in that apartment. The walls felt like they were closing in, suffocating me with memories of all the moments I thought were mine alone with Mike, now tainted by their betrayal. Without another word, I turned and walked out, slamming the door behind me. I didn't know where to go. I couldn't go back to my apartment, not with all the memories waiting for me there. So I drove aimlessly for what felt like hours, my mind a raging storm of emotions I couldn't even begin to process. Eventually, I pulled into a bar. Drink after drink, I tried to numb myself, to drown out the images of Mike and Sarah together, but no amount of alcohol could erase what I'd seen. After too many drinks, I stumbled out of the bar, fumbling for my phone. I found myself calling Emma, one of my closest friends. She picked up on the first ring, and I could hear the worry in her voice as soon as she heard my slurred speech. "Hey, are you okay?" "No," I said bluntly. "I need to crash at your place. I can't go home." "Of course," she replied quickly, her voice steady and reassuring. "Where are you? I'll come get you." I gave her my location, and within 20 minutes, she was there, pulling up outside the bar. She helped me into her car without a word, but I could see the concern in her eyes. She didn't know the full story yet, but she knew enough to see that I was breaking apart right in front of her. Emma sat with me in silence for a few minutes, letting me catch my breath. She'd always had this calm, grounding presence, and that night, I needed it more than ever. Once we were back at her apartment, she made me some tea and took a seat across from me. She reached over and squeezed my hand. "What happened?" she asked softly. I took a deep breath and, with each painful word, told her everything, about Mike, about Sarah, about catching them together just hours earlier. By the time I finished, tears were streaming down my face, and Emma looked as stunned as I felt. "Oh my God," she whispered, shaking her head. "I can't believe they'd do that to you." Neither can I muttered, wiping my eyes. I don't even know what to do, Emma. My whole life feels like it's falling apart. She gave my hand a gentle squeeze. You don't have to figure it all out right now. Just take a breath. We'll get through this, okay? One step at a time. I stayed at Emma's place for the next few days, trying to gather up whatever was left of my strength. Mike kept calling and texting, but I couldn't bring myself to respond. I didn't want to hear his excuses, and I sure didn't want to hear any more of his apologies. Sarah, on the other hand, stayed completely silent. She hadn't tried to reach out even once, as if the confrontation at the apartment had been enough for her, like she could just move on without a second thought. That silence somehow hurt more than anything. After about a week, I knew I couldn't avoid the situation forever. I had to go back to the apartment to get the rest of my things, and I needed to tell Mike, face to face, that it was over. So I texted him, saying I'd be coming by to pick up my things and that I didn't want to argue. I just wanted to leave with what was mine and be done with it. When I arrived, he was already there, waiting. The tension in the air was suffocating. I didn't say a word as I started gathering up my belongings. For a few minutes, we moved around each other in silence, but eventually, Mike broke it. Are we really going to end it like this? He asked quietly. I kept packing, not even looking at him. You made your choice, Mike. There's nothing left to talk about. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. I never meant to hurt you. You know that, right? I slammed a drawer shut, my patience wearing thin. Well, you did, Mike. You hurt me more than anyone ever has, and I don't think I'll ever be able to forgive you for that. For a moment, he just stood there, looking genuinely regretful. I'm sorry, he whispered, and for a split second, I almost believed him. But it was too little, too late. Without another word, I finished packing, walked out the door, and didn't look back. The moment I closed that door behind me, I felt an unexpected weight lift off my shoulders. It wasn't closure, not yet, but it was a step toward something like healing. As I walked to my car, though, a feeling nagged at me. It didn't feel like the end. There were too many unanswered questions, too many loose ends that wouldn't let me rest. Sarah still hadn't reached out. She'd vanished into silence, leaving me with the awful feeling that this betrayal was far from over. The silence between Sarah and me felt like a ticking time bomb, one that grew louder with each passing day. What was she thinking? What was Mike thinking? Part of me wondered if I'd ever get the closure I needed, or if I'd be stuck in this nightmare forever. I thought things couldn't possibly get worse after catching them together, but I was wrong. My heart was already in pieces, yet somehow, what happened next blindsided me, breaking me in ways I hadn't thought were possible. It started a week after I'd packed up the last of my things from Mike's apartment. I was still crashing at Emma's place, trying to put distance between myself and the mess that had become my life. I hadn't spoken to Sarah, and I wasn't planning to anytime soon. But then my mom called. When I saw her name flash on my phone screen, I hesitated, bracing myself. I hadn't told my parents what had happened yet. I didn't know how they'd react, and honestly, I was terrified to find out. But I couldn't avoid them forever. I took a deep breath and picked up. Hey, Mom. Sweetie, her voice was soft, too soft. Just hearing that one word sent a chill down my spine. We need to talk. A pit formed in my stomach. About what? There was a pause, and then I heard her sigh. About Sarah and Mike. I froze. My worst fear was coming true. She knew. Of course she knew. Sarah must have told her. What about them? I asked, even though I already knew where this was heading. Your father and I. Well, we've spoken to Sarah. My mom's voice had that carefully measured tone she used whenever she was trying to calm me down, but it only made the anger build inside me. She went on, she feels terrible about what happened. She feels terrible. I could hardly believe what I was hearing. Mom, she was sleeping with my boyfriend behind my back for months. How is that something she can just feel bad about and move on? Sweetie, listen to me, she replied, slipping into that soothing motherly tone that used to comfort me as a child. Now it only made me sick. Families make mistakes. People make mistakes. And we have to find it in our hearts to forgive them. I nearly dropped the phone. Forgive her? Mom, she betrayed me in the worst way possible. She destroyed my relationship. Relationships are complicated, she said, as though this were some trivial issue. And Sarah, she's still your sister. We don't want this to tear the family apart. Tear the family apart, I repeated, barely able to contain my disbelief. Here I was, standing in the wreckage of my life, and my own mother was asking me to forgive the person who'd helped cause it. Was she serious? The family was already torn apart, but not by me. It was Sarah who had blown everything up, and now my parents wanted to sweep it under the rug, act like it was nothing. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice steady. Mom, I can't just forgive her. What she did was unforgivable. She destroyed my trust, my relationship with Mike. Everything. We all make mistakes, dear, she replied in that infuriatingly calm voice. Sarah feels awful. She's been crying for days. She knows she was wrong, and she's sorry. Sorry. I let out a bitter laugh. She's only sorry because she got caught. She's your sister, Mom said, like that one word was supposed to fix everything. And in this family, we believe in forgiveness. We need to come together, not let this drive a wedge between us. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My own mother was asking me to forgive the person who'd wrecked my life. It was like she wasn't even listening to me, like my pain didn't matter. All that mattered to her was keeping the family intact, even if that meant sweeping my feelings under the rug. Mom, I can't do that, I said firmly. Not right now, and maybe not ever. A long silence followed on her end, and then she sighed. I understand you're upset, but this isn't the way, sweetie. We can't let anger fester like this. You need to talk to Sarah. I already talked to her, I snapped. All she did was make excuses. She didn't even apologize properly. She doesn't care, Mom. She's only thinking about herself. That's not true, Mom insisted, her tone growing frustrated. Sarah loves you, and she's hurting too. She's hurting, I repeated, barely able to keep my voice steady. What about me, Mom? I'm the one who was betrayed. Her voice softened. I know, sweetie. I know this is hard, but you're strong, and I know you'll get through it. Just give it time. We can all heal if we stick together. The anger inside me was bubbling over. I can't just give it time, Mom. This isn't something I can just get over. Sarah ruined my life, and you're asking me to forgive her like it's no big deal. We're asking you to forgive her because she's your sister, she said quietly. Family is everything. I hung up. I couldn't bear to listen to another word. For the next few days, I barely left Emma's apartment. I felt like I was drowning, suffocating under the weight of my family's betrayal. My parents had chosen Sarah's side, asking me to forgive and forget as if her actions didn't matter. In their eyes, family loyalty meant everything, and my feelings, my shattered trust? Those were just inconveniences. My mom's voice was soft, but her words landed with the force of a hammer. Sarah has been going through a lot, she began, pausing as if to gauge my reaction. She's devastated by what happened, and she knows she hurt you deeply. I couldn't help it. I let out a harsh, bitter laugh. She's devastated? Really, Mom? I'm the one whose life blew up, and you want me to feel sorry for her? My dad held up a hand, trying to play peacemaker. We're not asking you to ignore your pain, honey. We know this has been incredibly hard on you too. I cut in, my voice shaking with anger. She didn't just make a little mistake, Dad. She slept with my boyfriend for months. And you're acting like this is some family disagreement that can be fixed over a cup of coffee. Sarah shifted on the couch, looking down at her hands, and I could see a flicker of discomfort on her face. Good. She should feel uncomfortable. She'd destroyed everything. My mom gave me that pleading look she always used when she was about to ask me for something impossible. Sweetie, we know this isn't easy. But holding on to anger won't help anyone heal. We need to come together now more than ever. Come together, I repeated, my voice barely above a whisper, shaking with barely contained rage. You want me to fix this, to be the bigger person, to pretend like my sister didn't tear my life apart? My mom sighed, pressing her lips together. Sarah's still your sister, and family is everything, she said, her voice firm now. We don't want this to be something that divides us forever. We need to forgive and move forward. I looked around the room, from my mom's hopeful face to my dad's worried expression, and finally to Sarah, who looked away when my eyes landed on her. This was it. My family had chosen, no, decided, that I should just swallow my hurt and play nice for the sake of peace. Fine, I said, my voice flat, barely holding back the bitterness I felt. If family is everything, then maybe I don't belong here. Because I refuse to forgive someone who clearly doesn't care about what they've done to me. Without another word, I got up and walked out, ignoring their shocked faces as I headed for the door. I didn't know where I'd go, but one thing was certain. I was done being the one to hold the family together when no one cared to hold me together. My dad cleared his throat, looking at Sarah as if urging her to speak up. Sarah, she has something she wants to say, he added gently. Sarah shifted uncomfortably, her gaze fixed on the floor. Finally, she murmured, I'm sorry. I know I messed up. I know I hurt you, and I don't expect you to forgive me right away, but I'm really, really sorry. Her words sounded empty, like a hollow echo. I'd heard them before, and they meant nothing to me now. I stayed silent, refusing to acknowledge her so-called apology. My mom glanced between us, her voice soft and hopeful. We all make mistakes, but the important thing is to learn from them. Sarah knows she was wrong, and she's trying to take responsibility. My lip trembled as I struggled to keep my emotions in check. She hasn't taken responsibility for anything, I finally replied, my voice shaking. She's just saying what you want her to say. That's not true, Sarah said, her tone defensive as she finally looked up. I am sorry. I've been trying to apologize, but you won't even give me a chance. Why should I? I snapped, turning to face her. You betrayed me, Sarah. You're supposed to be my sister, but you slept with my boyfriend. How can you expect me to just forgive you and move on? I don't expect you to forgive me right away, she replied, her voice losing its edge, now barely a whisper. But I do want us to fix things. We're sisters. We shouldn't let this come between us. You came between us, I said, coldly. Not me. My parents exchanged glances, their expressions growing tense. I could tell they didn't want this conversation to spiral any further, but it was already beyond saving. We're not asking you to forgive her right away, my dad interjected, his voice calm, measured. Just to consider it. In time, maybe you can let go of the anger and start to heal. I shook my head slowly. I can't do that. Not right now. Please, just try, my mom pleaded, her eyes filling with tears. We're a family, and we need to stick together, no matter what. It felt like I was suffocating. They just didn't get it. To them, family meant sweeping everything under the rug, pretending like nothing was wrong as long as everyone could smile and play nice at the dinner table. But I couldn't do that. I couldn't ignore the agony that was eating me alive. I can't, I said again, getting to my feet. I need space. Before they could say anything more, I walked out, slamming the door behind me. After that disastrous family meeting, I felt like I was spiraling. The betrayal, the relentless pressure to forgive, the crushing realization that my own family didn't care about my pain, it was all too much. I fell into a darkness I couldn't climb out of. Every day felt like a weight pressing down on my chest, heavy and suffocating. I didn't know how I'd ever find the strength to move on. It felt like I was suffocating in my own skin. The thought of waking up each day, having to face the reality that my sister had wrecked my life and that my parents had sided with her, was unbearable. I stopped leaving Emma's apartment altogether. She tried to help, to pull me out of the darkness, but there was only so much she could do. I was too far gone, too wrapped up in the pain to reach for her hand. I shut everyone out, convinced that I had no one left who truly understood. Days bled into each other. I wasn't eating, barely sleeping, just replaying everything over and over in my mind until the edges of my sanity began to fray. All I could think about was how much easier it would be if I didn't have to feel any of it anymore. I hadn't made any concrete plans, but one night, after everyone else had gone to bed, the thoughts grew deafening. I found myself on the bathroom floor, staring at my own reflection. The person looking back at me was someone I barely recognized. Hollow eyes, pale skin, a shadow of who I used to be. I felt like an empty shell, nothing left inside but raw, aching pain. I don't know how long I sat there, but at some point, my hand reached for a bottle of pills. It wasn't planned, not really, they were just there. And I was so tired. My hand trembled as I twisted off the cap, letting a handful of pills fall into my palm. I was about to take them when there was a knock on the door. "Hey, you okay in there?" Emily's voice called out, muffled by the door but filled with concern. I froze, my heart thundering in my chest. I didn't answer. I couldn't. All I could think about was how close I'd come, how I'd almost crossed that line. "Open up," she said, her voice more urgent now. Still, I couldn't move. Then, suddenly, the door burst open. Emily must have picked the lock, something she'd once learned from a dumb online video and had probably never thought she'd actually use. But here she was, saving my life. Her eyes went wide as she saw me sitting on the floor, pills in my hand. "Oh my God," she whispered, rushing over and kneeling beside me. She grabbed the bottle and threw it across the room, the pills scattering like tiny lifelines. "What the hell are you doing?" Her voice broke, full of fear and anger and something else. Love, maybe. I couldn't answer. The dam had burst, and I was sobbing too hard, shaking uncontrollably. I crumbled into her arms, feeling like I might shatter completely. "I can't do this anymore," I whispered. "I don't want to be here." "You're not doing this," Emily said firmly, holding me close, refusing to let go. "I'm not losing you. We're getting through this together." She stayed with me that entire night, never leaving my side. She held me, even as I sobbed uncontrollably, even as every broken part of me spilled out. Emily was the reason I didn't go through with it. If she hadn't been there, if she hadn't knocked on that door, I don't know where I'd be right now. Maybe I wouldn't be anywhere at all. The next few days were a blur, but Emma and Emily stayed close, keeping an eye on me, making sure I was never alone for too long. They practically had to force me to eat, even though food was the last thing I wanted. They suggested getting professional help, but I wasn't ready for that yet. All I wanted was to escape. So when my grandparents called out of the blue, offering me a place to stay, I jumped at the chance. They lived out in the country, in a quiet, peaceful house surrounded by open fields and dense woods, the same place I'd loved visiting as a child. It felt like the perfect refuge from everything, miles away from Mike, Sarah, and my parents. Within days, I'd packed up my few belongings and moved in with them. For the first time in what felt like ages, I could breathe. My grandparents didn't push me to talk about what had happened. They simply let me be, giving me the space and quiet I so desperately needed to begin healing. Emily stayed in touch, too, coming out to visit me on weekends and keeping me grounded. She was my lifeline through those dark days, the one person I knew I could count on. But no matter how far I ran, the anger simmered beneath the surface, a wound that refused to close. I couldn't shake the betrayal. It ate at me every day, like poison. Then, out of nowhere, everything changed. One morning, I woke up to a series of frantic texts from Emily. Her friend Casey had posted something on social media, an explosive, tell-all post about Mike and Sarah's affair. My hands shook as I scrolled through the messages, torn between fury and relief. Casey had written a brutal expose, laying out every sordid detail, how Mike had been cheating on me with my sister, and how my own family had taken Sarah's side. She didn't hold back, and within hours, the post had gone viral. People were commenting and sharing it, calling out Mike and Sarah for their betrayal. The backlash was swift and overwhelming, and their carefully crafted reputations began to unravel. Sarah, who'd always obsessed over her perfect image, was now publicly branded as the villain. And Mike. His friends quickly distanced themselves, openly condemning his actions. At first, I didn't know what to feel. I hadn't asked for this, hadn't wanted my personal life splashed across the internet. But deep down, I felt a strange, almost guilty sense of satisfaction. They couldn't hide behind lies anymore. They couldn't pretend to be innocent. Everyone knew the truth now. The fallout was immediate. Sarah's social media accounts went dark, her once pristine reputation crumbling before her eyes. For the first time, they were the ones dealing with the consequences. And I felt, for the first time in a long while, a glimmer of justice. My mom's voice was ice cold, each word sharper than the last. "You think you know everything, don't you? You think you're the only one who's been wronged. But you don't even know the full story." I felt my heart stutter, a chill creeping down my spine. "What are you talking about?" There was a long, heavy pause on the other end of the line. Finally, my mom spoke again, her voice low, laced with something unsettling, something I couldn't quite place. "This isn't as simple as you think," she said. "There are things you don't know. Sarah's not the only one who made mistakes here." "What's that supposed to mean?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. The anger that had been simmering inside me all this time was suddenly mixed with a gnawing anxiety. What could possibly excuse what Sarah had done? But my mom didn't answer directly. Sarah didn't mean to hurt you, she said instead, her tone shifting to something almost pleading. She's always tried to look out for you in her own way. And yes, she made a mistake, a terrible one. But this post, it's tearing her apart. Do you really want to see your sister's life destroyed? I closed my eyes, gripping the phone tightly. I didn't do this. She did this. She's the one who wrecked everything, not me. I'm the one left to pick up the pieces. My mom sighed heavily. You have no idea the weight she's carrying, the guilt. And this scandal isn't just hurting Sarah, it's hurting all of us. Your father and I. Do you think we wanted this? Maybe you should have thought about that before you sided with her, I replied, my voice shaking. You ignored what she did to me, just swept it under the rug because it was easier than facing the truth. That's not fair, and you know it, she shot back, her voice steely again. Family isn't just about picking sides, it's about keeping us together. But you're determined to make this worse, even if it means tearing the whole family apart. Tearing the family apart? I let out a bitter laugh. You're blaming me for that? Sarah and Mike betrayed me, and you stood by her. And now you're blaming me. Silence stretched between us, each second heavier than the last. Finally, my mom spoke, her voice cold and clipped. You think it's all so black and white, don't you? Well, maybe you should dig a little deeper before you decide who's really to blame here. And then, without another word, she hung up. I sat there, stunned, the silence around me pressing in. My mom's words echoed in my mind, unsettling and cryptic. What was she hiding? As I stood there, my mother's words settled over me like a suffocating weight. She had supported the affair. She had actually believed that letting Sarah and Mike destroy my life was somehow in my best interest, all because she thought I was too attached to Mike. Her twisted logic was like a punch straight to my core. How could you? I whispered, barely able to get the words out. My voice was shaking with a mixture of fury and heartbreak. How could you do that to me? I was trying to protect you, she said, but her words sounded hollow, as if she didn't even believe them herself. Protect me? I let out a bitter laugh, each note of it tasting like acid. You didn't protect me, you destroyed me. Sweetie, please, she pleaded, her voice wavering. I didn't mean for it to go this far. I'm done, I replied, my voice cold and trembling with rage. I'm done with all of you. You, Dad, Sarah, none of you care about me. You've all shown me that. Don't say that, she begged, her voice breaking. We're your family. No, I said firmly, my heart hardened by their betrayal. You're not. Not anymore. Before she could respond, I hung up, the finality of it reverberating through me. My hands were shaking, my heart pounding. My own mother had supported the affair, believing she knew what was best for me. But all she'd done was rip my world apart, shattering any illusions I'd had about family loyalty and support. In that moment, I knew I was truly done. Done with Sarah, done with my parents. They weren't my family anymore. I had a new family now. Emily, Emma, and my grandparents. They were the ones who had been there when I needed them, the ones who'd shown me what real love and support looked like. In the months that followed, I slowly began to piece my life back together. Living with my grandparents brought me a kind of peace I hadn't known in years. They didn't pry or push, they simply let me be, offering quiet support whenever I needed it. Emily remained my anchor, visiting every weekend. Together, we made plans for my future. Little by little, I took steps forward, applying for new jobs, going to therapy, and even thinking about going back to school. For the first time in what felt like forever, I could imagine a life for myself, a future that didn't include Mike, Sarah, or the toxic dynamics that had once consumed me. It wasn't easy. There were days when the weight of everything tried to pull me back into that dark place, days when the past felt like it was crushing me. But with the unwavering support of my friends and my grandparents, I found the strength to keep moving forward. I could see now that I was building something better, a life without the people who had only dragged me down. Eventually, I stopped checking social media, letting go of whatever whispers of drama remained. I didn't care what people were saying about Mike or Sarah anymore. They were part of a life I'd left behind, a life I no longer needed. For the first time in a long time, I was free. I stopped caring what people were saying about Sarah and Mike. Their reputations, the scandal, they didn't matter to me anymore. I had my own life to focus on now, and for the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of peace with that. In the end, I realized that family isn't just about blood. It's about the people who stand by you, who support you when everything else falls apart. For me, that wasn't my parents or my sister. My real family was the people who had shown up when I needed them most: Emily, Emma, and my grandparents. They were the ones who reminded me what genuine love, loyalty, and resilience looked like. And that, I realized, was all that mattered.